The storm had not yet broken, but the sky already carried the weight of something that wanted to fall. That was the feeling that hung in the air the moment she stepped into the quiet old antiques shop on the corner of Willow Lane. The gentle chime of the door should have sounded ordinary, but instead it felt like the beginning of something that had waited years to reveal itself. And when she saw him, standing behind the counter, brushing dust off an old wooden box, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't come here by accident. She had rehearsed this moment for weeks, maybe for years without knowing it. What she held in her hand, a faded photograph tucked between her trembling fingers, seemed too small to change anyone's life. But in truth, it carried a storm of its own. She approached him slowly, her footsteps careful, as if each one might shatter the fragile courage she'd gathered. He looked up, confused at her hesitation. He didn't recognize her, not truly. Why would he? To him, she was just another customer, someone passing through the endless stream of faces that entered the little shop. But she knew him. She had known about him long before today, long before she stepped through that door. She had memorized his story piece by piece, gathering it like scattered fragments of a puzzle that someone else had tried to hide. Her voice shook when she finally placed the faded photograph on the counter. It was worn around the edges, creased in the center, the colors almost vanished. But still, the image of two young people, one of them him, smiling at the camera could be made out. He stared at it, at first simply puzzled. Then his world tilted. He touched the photograph with the tenderness of someone who had lost far too much already. She waited for him to turn it over. Waited for the message he hadn't seen in over 30 years. The message that would change everything. When he finally did, something inside him broke open. The handwriting was familiar, so painfully familiar that his throat tightened. It belonged to the one person he had spent a lifetime trying to forget and trying not to lose at the same time. A message written for him. A message meant to reach him long before now. A message that never did. She watched the color drain from his face, watched his hands tremble, watched the storm she had brought unfold quietly in his eyes. She didn't speak. Not yet. The message on the back spoke louder than anything she could say. And that was how it began. The man's name was Daniel. To the world around him, he was just an antiques shop owner, soft-spoken, polite, always helpful. A man who lived a simple life surrounded by old memories that did not belong to him. But beneath that calm exterior was a history he rarely allowed himself to touch. The kind that left marks not visible but felt deeply in the quiet hours of the night. She knew this. She knew more than she ever expected to. Her name was Amelia, and the photograph belonged to someone they had both loved, though in different ways and without ever knowing about each other. The woman in the picture, the one whose handwriting lived on the back of that faded photo, was Amelia's mother and Daniel's first love, Elena. And for Amelia, this meeting was not only about uncovering the truth. It was about giving a man a piece of his soul back. Because her mother, in the final months of her life, had whispered something, brokenly, tearfully, that Amelia never forgot. She said she once loved someone so deeply it scared her. Someone she lost not because they grew apart, but because fate had torn the two of them into separate directions. And she regretted never sending the last message she wrote him. Amelia found it after her mother's passing, pressed between the pages of an old journal, hidden away with the carefulness of someone who wanted to move on but never truly could. The picture and message were meant for Daniel. The message written on the back had only 9 words. I never stopped loving you. Please forgive me for leaving. Those words hit Daniel like a crashing wave. He had waited years for closure he never received. And now, when life had already taken so much from him, it handed him this, an old wound reopened, not to hurt him, but perhaps to heal him. But healing never comes gently. He asked Amelia how she found him, and she told him the truth. She had searched through old letters, maps, phone directories, anything that could trace the path of her mother's past. It took her months to find his small shop in this forgotten street. She didn't know how he would react. She didn't know if this would help him or reopen a scar she had no right to touch. All she knew was that her mother's last days were filled with the same name, Daniel, repeated softly, almost like a prayer. As Daniel listened, memories began to flood back. He had once been young, hopeful, passionately in love. Elena had been the spark in his ordinary world. They spoke about dreams, about the future, about building a life together. And then one day she disappeared. A letter came weeks later, short and painfully vague, ending everything. He blamed himself. He blamed circumstance. He blamed time. But mostly, He blamed the parts of himself that he believed were never enough. He never knew her side of the story. He never knew she had been forced to leave, pressured by family obligations, overwhelmed by circumstances she could not escape. He never knew she wanted to return, but life had already thrown her onto a different path, and then another, until returning became something she didn't know how to do. And now, decades later, her daughter stood in front of him, carrying the message Elena never had the courage to send. Amelia watched the man as he tried to steady himself. His entire life shifted right there, in the quiet hum of his dusty antiques shop. She realized he wasn't the only one finding closure today. She was finding pieces of her mother, pieces she never understood, pieces she never saw. They talked for a long time after that. About Elena, about life, about regrets that shape people and choices that break them. Daniel spoke quietly, almost reverently, as if bringing her mother's memory back to life in his words. And Amelia listened with more emotion than she expected. They both cried at moments they didn't anticipate. They both fell silent when the weight was too much to hold. Outside, the storm finally broke. Rain tapped against the glass windows like fingertips, soft at first, then heavy, relentless. The world outside might have been falling apart, but inside the shop, something was being rebuilt. Amelia asked him what he would have said to her mother if he had seen the message sooner. Daniel thought about it for a long breath. He looked at the photograph again, not at the faded colors but at the message on the back. Then he said something that stayed with her forever, that love like theirs didn't disappear, even when people did. That forgiveness wasn't something he needed to force, it had always lived quietly inside him, waiting for a moment like this to be spoken aloud. His words brought Amelia a sense of peace she didn't expect to feel. She had carried guilt for not knowing her mother's past sooner, for not being able to connect the dots until it was too late. But Daniel reminded her gently that no one is expected to understand everything in time. Sometimes we discover truths only when we're strong enough to hold them. They spent hours sharing memories, laughter, quiet tears. It felt less like two strangers meeting and more like two souls finally completing a circle left open for decades. When the rain eased, Amelia prepared to leave. But Daniel stopped her, his voice unsteady yet determined. He told her that the photograph didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to her. It was the last message her mother ever wrote from her heart. But Amelia shook her head. She said the message was written for him. That her mother wanted him to know she never forgot. That love, real love, had held on to him long after life forced them apart. The photograph, she insisted, belonged where the message was intended to go. She placed it softly back into his hand. And for a moment, the shop stood utterly silent, as though the entire world had paused to let him breathe again. Daniel didn't argue. He simply nodded, accepting the weight of a long-lost love finally returned to him. But Amelia wasn't done. She took a deep breath, gathering the courage to ask him something she had been holding back since the moment she walked through his door. She asked him if he regretted loving her mother. She asked him if the pain of losing her was worth the love they once had. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked toward the window, at the last drops of rain sliding down the glass, carrying reflections of the life he lived and the life he once hoped for. Then he said something that made Amelia's heart ache in the most unexpected way. He said regret only exists when love is measured by endings. But true love, real love, is measured by moments. And the moments he had with her mother were worth a lifetime, even if he lost her afterward. Amelia needed those words more than she realized. Before leaving, she promised she would visit again. Not out of obligation, but because something inside her felt like this meeting wasn't meant to be just a one-time encounter. Daniel smiled softly and said he would like that. As she stepped out of the shop, the cool air of the lingering rain touched her face. She felt lighter somehow, not because everything had been resolved, but because part of her mother's past, part of her heart, was no longer hidden behind silence. Daniel watched her go until she turned the corner. Then he closed the shop door, leaned against it, and finally let the long-held tears fall. Not tears of sorrow alone, but of release, of healing, of understanding that he had been loved in ways he never knew. And that love had found its way back to him when he least expected it. He sat down and held the photograph again. This time, he didn't look at the faded image. He focused only on the message on the back. The handwriting, the words, the heart behind them. He whispered that he forgave her. And somehow, he felt she heard him. The next weeks changed both their lives. Amelia returned often, not because of the photograph, but because something in Daniel reminded her of her mother's gentleness. She brought him coffee, helped him sort items in the shop, learned stories of old objects and the memories they carried. He taught her that even broken things could be valuable again with the right care. She taught him that second chances sometimes arrive quietly, without warning. Their connection grew, not as replacements for what they lost, but as two people healing together. Two stories intertwined by love that existed long before they met. Daniel reopened parts of his heart he thought had closed forever. Amelia found in him a mentor, a friend, perhaps the closest living remnant of her mother's youth. And together they kept Alina's memory alive not through sorrow, but through gratitude. Months later, Amelia asked Daniel if he wanted to visit her mother's favorite place, an old seaside cliff where Elena used to watch sunsets, a place she had mentioned many times in her final days. Daniel hesitated at first, afraid of the emotions it would bring. But in the end, he agreed. When they stood on that cliff, the waves crashing below them, the horizon painted in colors that looked too perfect to be real, Daniel felt something shift inside him again. Amelia placed a small flower on a rock near the edge, whispering something only the wind could hear. Daniel closed his eyes and whispered a thank you, to life, to love, to the universe, for giving him this unexpected closure, this unexpected connection, this unexpected peace. He felt freer than he had in decades. On their way back, Amelia said she was glad she found him. Daniel smiled and said she didn't find him, she was led to him. Some connections, he said, are written long before we ever understand why. And he believed that now more than ever. The story of Daniel and Amelia was not one of romance or reunion of lovers. It was something quieter, deeper. A story of healing through the echoes of a love that once existed. A story of two lives touched by someone they both loved in different times and different ways. A story that teaches us that even when people leave, the love they give never truly does. And in that truth, both of them found purpose, strength, and a new beginning. So if you're listening to this right now, remember this: life has a way of bringing the right people to us at the right moment, even when it feels too late. Healing can arrive in unexpected forms. Closure can come from the smallest forgotten photograph. And love, real, deep, unforgettable love, always leaves a trace that eventually finds its way back home. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional, inspiring stories. Your support helps us bring you more tales that remind us all of the courage it takes to love, to forgive, and to begin again.